Hello and welcome to Astrology with Zeke. This will be my third episode of my series on the stories behind historical figures. We're going to be going over Robert the Bruce today. Um, so, just to briefly cover who he is for those who don't know, he was a king of Scotland, and his claim to fame is claiming Scottish independence from England after a period of turmoil in which the previous king of Scotland had died and didn't have a clear heir. It was a huge time of civil strife within Scotland because there was a whole bunch of claimants, and England went ahead and took advantage. And through a series of political moves, Edward Longshanks effectively became the de facto king, basically, with political puppets of his being figureheads. And anyways, Robert the Bruce was a man who had a very clear claim to the throne, and after Edward Longshanks' death and Edward II succeeded the throne of England was when Robert the Bruce effectively seized an opportunity, eventually winning independence for Scotland and becoming King of Scotland. Anyways, with all of that out of the way, I wanted to go ahead and just dive into his chart because it's quite interesting and fascinating, and he has some unfortunate placements, but strangely work in his case. So, with all of that out of the way, let's begin. So, Robert the Bruce is a Taurus rising with his chart ruler Venus in Cancer, and interestingly enough, his Cancer is on the IC, which is the cusp of the fourth house, which the fourth house is all about your roots, your home, effectively where you come from, and the natural ruler of the fourth house is Cancer, which has a lot to do with the past, the history where you come from, and security, especially within a domestic setting. So I would say this is a very powerful placement for someone's chart ruler, especially someone who would be a king. This is especially the case when Taurus is also a sign that has a lot to do with security, especially material security. Taurus and Cancer signs often really get each other because they have a lot in common. I would say if there is a difference, probably Taurus is a little less emotional and more grounded, but apart from that, they're very similar. What's also interesting is there is a pretty big stellium in Robert's chart in Cancer. Besides Venus, we also have Mars, which is conjunct his Venus, his Sun, and the North Node. The North Node and the Sun are exactly conjunct as well. And we'll go into why that's a very significant placement in just a bit. So just to get the misfortunate placement out of the way, that would be Robert's Mars in Cancer. So Mars is technically in fall in Cancer because Mars is the planet that's all about aggression, how we assert ourselves, how you fight. And Cancer is quite the opposite. It's all about security, safety, and protection. It's the sign of the crab, and it's highly defensive. And people with their Mars in Cancer tend to have a great deal of trouble dealing with aggression. They tend to deal with it in highly unusual and undignified ways. However, this is one of the very rare cases that I think it really works, because most of Robert's childhood was very precarious. He spent a lot of time in his childhood in the English court and effectively surrounded by enemies. So, being someone who would internalize a lot of those aggressive feelings um, was probably very beneficial at the time and allowed him to fly under the radar and learn. We can see this even more when we look at the ruler of his Mars, which is the moon, which is in Libra. It is making a square, which is a difficult aspect and means they don't get along. And I would say in his early childhood, the moon probably won out in these conflicts. So the moon in Libra is all about finding a security and feeling nurtured in an emotionally detached way. It's actually a pretty good placement for someone who is a political figure, who's into politics. And it's also in his sixth house, which has to do with his critical thinking, how he approaches work. So he's someone who would be able to emotionally detach himself just enough to not allow his emotions rule him. However, he is also the person who would never forget an insult. Ever. Ever. In fact, I bet you he probably had a lot of stomach ulcers from all the repressed aggression. That being said, there were certainly times where his aggression won out, and it would probably be at some of the most ill-advised times. We'll come back and revisit that later. I think what also helps is, despite his Mars being in Cancer, again, his chart ruler Venus being in Cancer, squaring the moon, that's what's called mutual reception. And the moon and Venus already get along pretty well. So to dig deeper into why that's really not that bad of a placement is someone with a Venus in Cancer gets a lot of emotional stability and a lot out of being secure. Gets a lot out of their family, their home life. So even though it's a square in that, especially in his early childhood, he was placed in a position where he perhaps had to place others' interests and suppress his own. It actually works a lot because it kept his family safe, at least in those early years, in those more precarious years of his life. And it allowed him to be emotionally detached enough and patient enough to wait for the proper time to strike. So real quick, we'll go on and move to his Sun and North Node, because I find this just highly significant, because it's also in the fourth house, again, about your home and roots. And, as he is the king, or the future king, this is all about his identity and who he was. And to my mind, this just means he was just destined to be king. And it's pretty clear through historical records that he never doubted his right to be king, ever. And, I mean, it's just written all over his chart. It's clear as day. And his Sun does make a really nice aspect to his Saturn, which is in Virgo, which is all about providing the structure and focusing on all the tiny little details that would make his ambitions happen. So he's the kind of person who knew exactly what he had to do to make things work. So we can go ahead and go back to his Mars, because I do want to talk about a time when Robert's temper did get the best of him. So, like I'll say, he was born in a time when there were competitors to the Scottish throne. And his biggest competition was a man by the name of John Comyn. And there was a time when the conflict between the two escalated to a point that they had to meet on a truce, and they met in a church. And no one really knows what was said between the two. There's conflicting accounts, especially with how things went down. But effectively what happened is Robert the Bruce ended up murdering John Comyn on sacred ground in a church, which of course was a very bad move, was very rash, very stupid. It got him excommunicated, which obviously put his goals of becoming king on hold, because that would just be impossible. That being said, to my mind, I think John Comyn probably threatened Robert's family, because I think that's just something a man with all these placements in Cancer would just not be able to overlook. For someone to directly insult or threaten his family, I think he would have killed him on the spot, even though it was a highly ill-advised move. So that being said, with all of his other placements in Cancer, it gave him a lot of the political savvy and know-how to make enough friends within the church to be able to be forgiven. And that's effectively what happened, is he was already friends with a bishop who was able to smooth things over enough that he was able to get the crown of Scotland. Also, another very fascinating placement of his, and again, this just kind of speaks to me that he was just born to be king, is his Mercury is conjunct his Neptune, and it's in Leo. That tells me he was the kind of person who, number one, an amazing storyteller, especially because this was in the fifth house, which is the house that's all about creativity and what you do for fun. And I think this guy could spin yarns like you wouldn't believe, and probably almost had a hypnotic quality to him, to where it's like once he started speaking, you felt like you had to listen. Not only you had to, you wanted to. You were just that engaged. And I think he was able to capture the heart and minds of his soldiers to make them feel that it was their duty to die for their country, to die for him. Not because they felt like they had to, but because they truly wanted to. It was something they had to do for Scotland, for their home. And he was just the right man to be able to instill that within his own people, to be able to dissolve the boundaries within people and inspire them to such great heroics to do what had to be done, especially in all the battles that they had to undertake, with the biggest one being the Battle of Bannockburn, which, if you look at the specifics of the battle, which was a great victory for the Scottish, and for those who don't know, looking from the outside, was a battle that the Scots should have lost. The other aspect that I want to talk about is he, like Edward II of England, has Chiron in the 10th house. Granted, for him, it's in a different sign. It's in Capricorn. So what that tells me is his lifelong struggle to become king was a great sore spot for him. Because even though he felt he was destined to it, it does make an opposition to his son. And so what that tells me is that it cost him a lot and took a great emotional toll on him. And if you look at his life history, it really did take a toll on him, on his family. There was times when siblings were captured, and he even lost a couple of brothers in his struggle to become king. And for someone with as many placements in Cancer as he does, especially both his son and his chart ruler, that would be devastating. That would be devastating. That being said, he was also a man of great conviction. So it was something that he knew that he had to move forward. Always move forward. And he probably never had the chance to look, knew he could not look back. It's not that he didn't have the chance to look back. It's that he knew he could not. There was too much riding on him becoming king and securing Scotland's independence for him to allow his emotions to take over. In fact, I think that's his moon in Libra was probably a great blessing, and that's probably what balanced out a lot of the watery emotions of Cancer, especially in a time as precarious for him that he was born into. So I think that's going to about do it for Robert the Bruce. I do hope you enjoyed it. It was certainly fun for me, especially seeing some of the interesting placements that for most people would be considered bad, but really worked for him. Anyways, yeah, if there's anybody else, any other historical figures that you'd like me to do, go ahead, leave their name in the comments below, and I'll give them a look-see. I also do this professionally, so if you want to book my services, check out my website, astrologywithzeke.com. I also have a Substack with articles in which I've done analyses for presidents who are on Mount Rushmore, so you can check those out as well. Anyways, that'll about do it for today. We'll see you all next time.